to feel this. I know you with my eyes closed. I feel this hard work and tears, working hard for the coming years. I've laid my hand on so many threads. Let's hope this one keeps me tied to you. I love abandoned places, you know I do. I see you floating up the stairway. The dust you kick up turns to gold. You see this dark place I've been living in that you dare to call your home. Because a shiny pretty new place just won't do it. And if you couldn't tell, I love abandoned places, I love them well. Right through me. Could you help me find my family? We'll keep turning, it consumes me. Here I find my forever family. River running runs right through me. Could you help me find my family? We'll keep turning, it consumes me. Here I find my forever family. I don't have to look to feel this. I know you with my eyes closed. Feel this hard work and tears, working hard for the coming years. I've laid my hand on this one thread, and it's kept me tied to you. I love abandoned places, you know I do. I love abandoned places, and I love you. I love you. I love you.
So going back thousands of years, right, with the creation of the Blackstone River Valley, the idea of this being the Blackstone River Valley is pretty recent in human history. For a very long time, that river was regarded as Kittikuck. And so Kittikuck comes from the Algonquian language group, and so it is still regarded as Kittikuck for a lot of people today.
Blackstone River, which runs from Worcester, Massachusetts down to Providence, Rhode Island. It's the major river here in central Massachusetts and northern Rhode Island. The river really played a huge role as the power source for the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution here in America. And it starts off with the Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, but then we see all along the Blackstone River and of course its tributaries, the development of mills and mill villages, and we see the transformation of what had been an agricultural landscape into an industrial landscape. The Narragansett, the Wampanoag, the Nipmuc all sort of came together around the river. So the river was in some ways both a dividing factor physically, but it was also a uniting point because it's where the different tribes would meet to trade and to get together. So it's a big part of their general story.
The fish and the wildlife were so plentiful that you could stand by the river and enjoy bounty. And that is something that some of the colonists come to shame as kind of lazy behavior.
William Blackstone was the first known permanent European settler of this area.
He was kind of a weird person who wanted to be away from other people.
But for example, we have no idea what this guy looked like. And there's a lot of other things that we'd like to know about him, which it's just not there. So he's always been a little bit of a mysterious figure. And then according to the legends, he owned an ox, and he got on the ox and he rode south looking for a new place to live. And the place he picked was just on the hillside overlooking where we're sitting now here in the Ann and Hope Mill. And that became known as Study Hill, and he called his house Study Hall. So he got here in 1635, and he lived here for 40 years. And during that time, we don't know a whole lot about him because unfortunately, during the King Philip's War, his house was burnt down. We don't know by who, but the house was burnt down. So we lost what, according to the stories, was probably the biggest library in America at the time, because he had books he brought with him, he had journals he'd written in, which I'm sure would have been fascinating to get this guy's views of what was going on here back then. Brown and Ives, you have Nicholas Brown Jr. His partner Thomas Ives is also his brother-in-law because Thomas Ives married Hope Brown. And so we have this family connection as well as a business connection.
So this is kind of a power family of early wealth in the state of Rhode Island.
So for example, it's the Brown family fortune that establishes Brown University. And a lot of what we know in Providence these days is things that come from the Brown family over the years.
Both of their imprints are going to be all over the state in the form of different Brown and Ives businesses, and then of course Ann and Hope as a brand and kind of legend in Rhode Island.
And they became extremely wealthy as merchant traders in Providence. At first you could sail small boats up into what's now Water Place Park and the areas around Kennedy Plaza and downtown Providence. That was all salt water. Then, as you got bigger ships, you had to get closer to the deeper water. So ports were built along both sides of the Providence River. And so, for example, if you go through downtown Providence today, some of the streets you'll notice are sort of like at weird diagonal angles, the last couple of streets before you get to the river. And that's because that's where the docks used to be. And then the area was filled in between them. Now, for some of these bigger ships, particularly the ships that were owned by the Lonsdale Company, these were Indiamen ships because they were going to travel to India. So India Point, where India Point Park is, that's where those ships docked. They named one of their ships after their wives, Ann and Hope, and it made a number of journeys around the world. One of the journeys, or a couple of the journeys that it made, particularly when Wilbur Kelly was the captain, just to give you an idea what they're doing is, so they're leaving America, leaving Providence, with anywhere from say $10,000 to $25,000 worth of locally produced goods. So things like bars of iron, barrels, rum, all sorts of local trade goods. And then they would sail first to Europe, often because of what's going on in this Napoleonic Wars. They're going to Holland, and then around Africa to India. And then from India to what's now Indonesia, then to China, Canton, China, and then all the way out they're making trades, things on and off the boat, and then of course they're also making trades on the way back. By the time they would get back here to Providence, about a year or so later, depending exactly, that $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 worth of trade goods might have turned into $200,000, $250,000 worth of silks and spices or coffee, tea, other items that are coming in from around the world. And that's $200,000, $250,000 in $1,800. So, we're talking millions of dollars today. And, they had multiple ships. These ships are making multiple voyages. During the Napoleonic Wars, both the British and the French were trying to control trade to their enemies by stopping ships. And so between different embargoes and just being threatened by these different navies, it just became unsafe or illegal in some cases for different years for American ships to travel outside of American waters. And they decided that they're going to invest, like Nicholas Brown's uncle did, Moses Brown, invest in this textile mill thing. And they also realize that they need a better transportation system. So the first thing that they do is they get involved in building the Blackstone Canal from Providence to Worcester. They realize that the lands here in what are now Cumberland and Lincoln, Rhode Island, are going to be much more valuable for mills once there's a better source of transportation here. So they're going to invest in that. They get other people to invest in that. They have that built. And so, but as major investors, they know where the canal route's going to go. And that's where the Lonsdale Company gets formed. And they use one of their former ship's captains, Wilbur Kelly. He owns a small mill down in what's now Lincoln, Rhode Island, was then Smithfield, Rhode Island. And they use him as a front man to go out and buy about 450 acres of land along the Blackstone River in what's now Lincoln and Cumberland, Rhode Island. And that land eventually becomes the area where the villages of Ashton, Berkeley, Lonsdale Old Village, and Lonsdale New Village here in Cumberland are constructed. And so the Lonsdale Company empire is built on these lands that are directly tied to the Blackstone Canal. But we don't really see a huge boom until the railroad comes in. And so, for example, a mill of this size isn't really going to get built until the trains are going to be here, in this case right outside the door, to bring the raw materials in and the finished goods out.
Right, so you have all of these huge leaps in technology in what you're using. And from the time that this is built, it's huge. It's considered kind of the crown jewel of the Lonsdale Company.
So William Blackstone lived up the hillside here, and this entire property was his. After he passed away, his friends buried him at a small spot right along the river, which of course now bears his name. And he was there undisturbed, to the best of our knowledge, for about 200 years. And then in 1886, they decided they're going to build this giant, 50,000 square foot mill right here. And so they had to flatten out the hillside. And in doing that, they came across William's grave, found a few bones and a few buttons and a few things like that. And they put that in a nice box, and they put everything aside, built this giant mill, and then they reburied him. And they planted this giant stone on top that says, here lies William Blackstone, founder of Cumberland, Rhode Island. And
so if you look up something like the old Ann and Hope mill, you're going to see that it's a cotton mill, which really doesn't tell you very much. And especially by the late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of these places are pretty heavily specialized. And we know that one of the things that they made here was sateen, which was a kind of fabric which would have had a shinier and kind of softer feel to it. And they also made cambric, which is something that was used on furniture, kind of a rougher materials. So the Lonsdale Company created an entire village and an entire kind of way of life. People who had grown up in the early days of industry in England would have recognized right away what was going on with the Lonsdale Company, which is if you're going to really build a big industry from the ground up, you need everything, right? You need eventually railroad tracks, but first you need roads, you need ways for workers to get around, ways to feed your workers. And the Lonsdale Company really aggressively creates that system in this part of Rhode Island. In a mill village, you have investors and different people like agents looking to build up generations of workers. And what that means is houses that are either duplexes or houses with 4 families or more, all living and working close together for a singular company. And in the Lonsdale system, you have your food being grown very close to where you live, very close to where you work, but everything is kind of subdivided, right? So a farmer might be used to taking care of just about everything on their own. The farmer isn't used to, when they come to a mill village, having someone grow their food, having someone else tell them when to work, having someone tell their children when to work. So you get a lot of security, but you give up a lot of personal freedom. So if you look at some of the housing that people were living in, you could technically classify some of it as tenement housing. Some of them might have a pretty spacious house because they work at a high level. Then you might have other folks who are crammed in pretty tight and they have a lot of children and they're living 2 or 4 families to a single unit.
And so again, it's a change of every aspect of these people's lives, even down to such simple things as actually being paid cash as opposed to having a barter system where you'd be, previously, oh, you're a farmer. Well, I have a couple extra, bags of flour, so I'm going to trade that for whatever I don't have. No, now you're actually getting money. So, some very simple things we just take for granted, really started here in the Blackstone Valley.
So we kind of have this idea sometimes of like people once in the mill village, always in the mill village.
And so we look at these communities today, and even though these mills, for the most part, are no longer manufacturing sites, the mill villages are still cores of our communities.
Within a few years, Rhode Island appoints people, including women actually, to inspect factories and to inspect mill villages and complexes. And they're looking at accidents and they're trying to determine what's actually happening with these accidents. Was it the cause of someone being negligent? Was there an issue? February 1896, there is a boiler explosion low in the belly of the Ann and Hope complex. There were lots of different boilers that were making this place run. With this explosion, it was so intense that bricks actually started flying out of the building. So really scary, as you can imagine. The fire department is brought out, and in the course of containing this incident, where lots of people suffered pretty severe burns, one of the firemen actually loses his life. But people really focused in on what happened here, right? Like, why did so many people get hurt? It's of note that when other industrial accidents and incidents happen, usually there's blame, right? What can we blame this on? And unfortunately, it's often on workers. We know that children worked here. Children worked at the Ann and Hope. Children worked at a lot of mills and factories through the 1930s. We know that children and what we think of as teenagers were working in this mill building. We know that their numbers are in the dozens as opposed to the hundreds and thousands of adults who are actually working for Ann and Hope. So Louis Wicks Hine is a pretty famous photographer. He is an investigator and he is highly motivated to actually show people the reality of child labor. So he goes on tours for the federal government and other agencies to document child labor. Children were definitely put in danger by working in mills. Some of the children were working on things that are essential to actually the operation of the machinery. A lot of his photos famously show children not wearing shoes, so they could move faster in a mill and have more of a grip on dirty, oily, cotton-filled floors. There's a photograph of a young woman in Pawtucket, and she's preparing a warp beam. She's a young girl. That warp beam is essential to the running of a power loom. A young person leaving school in middle school or high school to get a wage-earning job was not thought of as strange, especially a teenager who might have gone all the way through 10th grade, for example. By the 19-teens, a lot of places in New England, they had run out of energy. The people who owned the mills were not investing in them, or they had run out of funds, they hadn't modernized or hadn't adapted.
And it's time for you to build a new mill, and let's just say it's 1920. You have a choice, whereas at one point you had to build close to a river like the Blackstone, or you go down south, you're closer to the cotton, so you don't have to pay to ship it up here. You no longer need a running river to run your water wheel. Now you can either use steam power or just electricity, and run your machinery, and they don't have labor unions in the South. And so your wages are going to be significantly lower than they are up here in New England. And so beginning in the 1920s, even before the Depression, we begin to see a lot of mills around here begin to shut down. The Lonsdale Company mills kept going until 1936, but they too, in the middle of the Depression, shut down.
War contracts in the 19-teens and again in the 1930s and 1940s kind of save a lot of these places.
So the mill had a couple of uses for about a 10-year period. For example, during World War II, this was actually being used as a repair facility by the US Navy, and they needed another rail line so they could get things in and out of here efficiently. Well, that new train track was going to go smack dab right over William's grave. So they jack up the stone, they dig up William again, they put everything aside, they build the train track, but it's the middle of World War II, reburying a guy who's been dead since 1675, not exactly priority one. So they put the stone, and then I've heard two different stories. One story is that William the box of William was put on a shelf in one of these offices. The other story is that he was taken home by someone for safekeeping and put into a barn. We don't know. Either way, when the war's over, they decided, hey, this is a little bit busy over here along the riverbank. Let's put a new spot. We're going to put William right along Broad Street, put a little park around it. It'll be nice. So, they get the site, put in, get the stone out, and they're like, okay, who's got William? Nobody knows. We don't know what happened. What is missing. They put the new William Blackstone Memorial Park across the street, and that stone's there. It says, here lies. No, it's nothing underneath the stone. We do not know where William Blackstone is.
Now's the best time to save at Ann & Hope on GE and Black & Decker housewares. Like Black & Decker Space Maker Drip Coffee Maker. Mounts easily under cabinet, $38.99.
So part of what I love about working in the Blackstone Valley is stories of people reinventing themselves or reinventing things. And after World War II, a lot of mill complexes, including the Ann and Hope complex, people didn't really know what to do with them. You have these kind of big, like sleepy giants, and Martin Chase comes in and has this totally different vision for the Ann and Hope complex.
And at first, he was basically renting out different chunks of the building for other purposes. And then at one point, one of the manufacturers that was in here, I think they were making ribbon, they went out of business, and he was stuck with all this ribbon, and he started selling it. And so that was the very humble beginning of what became a department store in this building as well too. And so he then transformed what had been a mill for so many years into the Ann and Hope store. So now we have a third version of the Ann and Hope, going from a ship to a mill to a store. And so very well known around here. People, going to Ann and Hope. And I remember this is the place, you came and you bought your Christmas trees and you bought stereos and you bought couches like this one.
I loved going to Ann and Hope as a child. I always thought it was kind of a fun place, and by my lifetime, kind of a throwback place, right? Like Ann and Hope kind of always had quirky stuff. It was kind of interesting. I think part of what Ann and Hope did was it transformed shopping for people, right? Like that early post-war baby boom generation, they had a different experience shopping because of Ann and Hope.
There's the wonderful stories of, Sam Walton coming out here and, seeing how these things worked. And it's another example of, the ingenuity of the Blackstone Valley.
Shopping carts had existed prior to the 1950s, but they weren't common. And he has this idea that really transforms modern shopping. He is coming into the Ann and Hope complex and doing self-serve browsing, which was something really different for people, and kind of marketed at that post-war housewife, right, who might have the time to come in and browse and pick things out. This is yet another huge moment in the Industrial Revolution of changing the way people get stuff, right? Now you have the power to actually pick things off of shelves and to do your shopping.
So my job as an employee of the Ann and Hope Mill started in the summer of 1954, and it was my first job I ever had that I was paid for. And I started there as a stock boy. And so I rode my bicycle from Central Falls to the mill, parked my bike, and I worked like a day shift there. And so my job was to pick up merchandise in the stock rooms and bring it out to the sales floor where there were other people that stacked it up and whatever. So that's what I did. I started working, I guess, in June. And then I continued to work until September of 1954 there, when I went back to school. So I think what you want to hear about, though, is what happened in late August of 1954. August 31 of 1954 was when Hurricane Carol arrived in New England and caused a great amount of damage. The rain was extremely heavy. I can't tell you how many inches of rain fell, but the mill, as it's cited, is near the Blackstone River. And there's the mill building, a parking lot, and the railroad tracks, and then beyond the railroad tracks there's the Blackstone River. The Blackstone River now has flood controls on it, but at that time it did not. And so the river quickly overflowed its banks. What occurred is that the water did not overflow the railroad tracks and come into the parking lot. The water, in fact, seeped underground, under the railroad tracks and under the parking lot, and entered through the basement. And so the water rose maybe 2 to 3 feet high in the basement and pushed up the merchandise, tipped everything over. My supervisor was a fellow by the name of Blackie. I don't recall his last name. We reported to work that day, and the day of the storm, and of course we could not work because of the flooding. But they told us that as soon as the water started to recede, that they wanted us to continue working there. They wanted us to get down into the basement, and to remove the merchandise that was there. We went down into that basement area and started pulling out merchandise. There was still some water there, but children's clothing, women's clothing, men's clothing. We got down there, and with our hands we started picking this stuff up, And the racks too. We took the racks and we just shoved everything into these trucks, soaking wet. Just shoved everything into these trucks. We rode these trucks to North Main Street in Providence, where the old Rhode Island Auditorium was sited. And of course, that was a very famous arena for hockey. The Rhode Island Reds played there. The Celtics played some games there. And also there were a lot of boxing matches that were held there in the Rhode Island Auditorium. And it was owned by a fellow by the name of Lou Peary. And I actually met Mr. Peary there because we were hauling all this stuff inside the building and threw it up on racks. And they had our cashiers arrive there also to operate checkouts, And because school was starting in a week or so, people arrived by the carloads to the Rhode Island Auditorium and started going through this stuff on racks that wasn't moldy, but it smelled, it was wet and, dirty with flood water and whatever. People bought it all. They bought it all and they took it home, and I guess they cleaned it up and put it on their kids who went to school that next week,
An iconic Rhode Island-based discount retailer falls victim to the coronavirus pandemic. Ann and Hope announcing today that after nearly 70 years in business, they are shutting the doors of their remaining curtain and bath outlets.
And yeah, like we have seen in more recent years, it ran into competition. New malls opened up, and then we had, national chain stores like Walmart, we mentioned. When I was growing up here in the 1970s and 80s, we didn't have Walmart in New England, but Walmart came in, or other stores like Target and things like that. So, there's a lot of local chain stores. Ann Hope's one example, but you also had, things like Peerless or Jordan Marsh, other stores from around New England that didn't succeed. And so, it's like we were saying earlier, sometimes you have successes, sometimes you have failures. That edition of Ann and Hope lasted for about 50 years or so.
It's a sad day for a Rhode Island staple.
I'm ready to cry, to be honest.
Ann and Hope announcing they will be permanently closing all of their curtain and bath outlet locations. Corporate Vice President Ron Dorr blaming economic impacts from the pandemic and consumers shifting to online shopping. In a press release, Dorr says this was an exceedingly difficult decision, but after carefully looking at all of our available options, it became apparent that it was inevitable.
This was once a mill. We have other mills that have been turned into housing or turned into stores or turned into other opportunities. Ann and Hope got replaced by a new wave. Now we'll see what happens to this mill for its next generation.
Once a bustling industrial site, this sprawling 15-acre property is now set to undergo a remarkable transformation. The visionaries behind this ambitious project are Premier Land Development in collaboration with ZDS Architecture. Together they aim to create a vibrant mixed-use development, seamlessly blending the charm of the past with the demands of modern living. The Ann and Hope Mill development will provide a home for 241 residential apartment units, designed to offer comfort, style, and a sense of community. However, transforming a historic gem like the Ann and Hope Mill comes with its challenges, especially after a financing agreement expired, resulting in a higher interest rate. Yet their commitment remains unyielding. As this remarkable journey comes to an end, the name for the project will pay homage to the Ann and Hope legacy. The Ann and Hope Mill development will be a testament to the past, a celebration of the present, and a beacon of hope for the future.